Hello, and welcome to the Wizards Respite Sanctorum, a show that dives into all things TTRPG. We got a really fun episode for you lined out. We're going to be exploring the concept of health, HP, the survivability of our characters. This is a fantastic idea that I've been tinkering with quite a bit today, actually. But Zach actually was the one that came up with it. Zach, how are you
Yeah.
doing today?
That's a loaded question. Let's just say I'm alive and move forward with our podcast. I'm all right. I'm glad to be here. Glad to have this conversation. This is a topic for I know how we do a ton of different types of things on this podcast. Like we go from like reviews to like to in-depth to news stuff to in-depth like looks at certain things. This is one of the things like to maybe the social aspect. This I always love when we get into just the core concepts of role playing, both in performance but also statistically, and like how it should and should not be done. This is this is a topic I really want to talk about. I don't know why I used so many words to say something so short, but here we go.
For everybody out there, Zach is having a little bit of a rough time.
Some insomnia, folks.
He's
Don't
taking
cry
he's
for me,
taking some.
Argentina.
His HP is running a little on the low side. Everybody out there see what I just did?
You did.
Yeah, okay.
You did. Tied it right
Okay.
in. Tied it right in. I took an arrow to the knee. That's for the video players.
Actually, yeah, and that's actually kind of one of the things I was thinking about tinkering with. I love this idea for the same reason you do. We do all things TTRPG on this show, and when you made this suggestion, man, my brain really started going on this from a design standpoint. I think indie game designers are really going to get a lot out of this show because there's so many different ways HP and has been like sort of represented through different games and in the hobby, and they kind of do different things and how they function mechanically, how the players interact with them mechanically. There's a huge gambit of different ways of approaching it, and they get different results from the tone of the gameplay to the speed of the gameplay, the focus of the gameplay. There's so much to talk about here.
Yeah, I mean, hit points, health, however you decide it, damage levels, however you do survivability in a role-playing game really decides you don't think about it at the time.
Right.
But once you've played for a while, you realize that how that's the structure that survivability is set up sets the tone for the entirety of the rest of the game. Like how flimsy you are, like how damageable you are, like how they do that. I'm constantly getting on D&D's shit for being for gamification, for making it just feel like a video game or just like trading punches. I think hit points are at the root core of that too. Like their hit points are very simple, non-basics. Like here's a number and when it's 0 you dead. Like I think that like that when you look at hit points, when you really look at hit points in every game, it gives you an idea. Like the whole game kind of like spider webs out in front of you, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really, really insightful point. I hadn't really thought about that, but if you really think about it,
because I thought I was rambling for a second there. But feel free to interrupt me. I feel like I'm using way too many words to describe things right now.
I think when we get into like reoccurring injuries and stuff,
it's like I didn't know what to do with my hand. I felt like I was on a spaceship.
When we get into injuries and thresholds, I think your injury level, your psychological injury level is going to be acceptable as a few marks against you at the point. It's okay, man. We get you. No, but like I actually do. I think you had some like spot on points there that I hadn't even really thought about until actually like you actually said it. But the hit points are the most valuable resource for any player, for any character, because that is their life.
Yeah.
No matter how you reskin it or what you call it, or even how you shape it, and because there's a lot of different ways of like shaping essentially this
Yeah.
resource. But at the
Hmm.
point, at the end of it, it is the most important thing. Your
It
character's
is.
done if
Yeah.
they don't have this anymore.
And it really sets the tone. Like I said, like there's a game back in the day called Heavy Gear. It's a mecha game, and it's all on like damage levels. But the damage level is like you have a light, a heavy, and a kill, and so like the amount of damage you're hit with like is compared to those numbers. And if it's below it, you're fine. But if it's above the light, you take like a little checkbox in the light. And if it's above the medium, you take a heavy. You take a checkbox in the heavy, and you're stunned. And then if it's a kill, you're just dead outright. That sets a tone. You know what I mean? Like it sets
Yeah,
a tone for the game when you really think about it. You look at the gruesome kind of brutal damage level system of the World of Darkness stuff, where it's like the bruising, wounded, mauled, like sets the tone. It sets the tone for the game that you're in for. And I feel like that's something to be said about hit points. Is it really like the whole system kind of snakes off that. At least for me, I know that like single mod, one of the first things I came up with was the threshold system. So like, and then like everything from there kind of came. So like, I think that like there is a lot to that. Just having a base. Like, how do you want people to take damage and survive in your system?
yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's something that I think a lot of game designers out there, indie game designers, could definitely start with when they're designing their system is the hit point system. How do you keep it? How do you lose it? How do you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, get it
How do
from
you
other
get
people? How do
back?
you tear down other people's
Mm-hmm.
hit points? How do you get it back? That's a big one. Um, there's so many different ways that replenishing this pool has been played out. Almost like I healing in whatever respect that you want to call it, because you know we're talking about hit points, but there's also, other games that don't use HP at all.
Yeah.
That's not what they call it. You just described, like
Mm-hmm.
this threshold system. Um, but there's also like I got a couple of notes here. Like the sliding sort of scales
Mm-hmm.
that you're like kind of like talking about, like fate, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you take stress,
Mm-hmm.
depending on a social or cinematic situation, a failure of a roll or somebody rolling against you and you failing to roll like an opposition with an appropriate like
Mm-hmm.
ability
Yep.
will result in like levels of stress. So it's not exactly like this perfectly HP system that we've recognized from the classic RPGs, like D&D and Palladium. Um, but it's still like a HP pool. It's still a resource pool that sort of gets filled up, and in this case, when it gets filled up, it's a bad thing. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Let me ask you this, not to completely derail everything, but what is your favorite health point systems?
Ooh, so it is so hard to pin that down. I think it really like varies on the genre and the tone of the game. So if I'm playing like a high adventure game, which let's face it, most people have played D&D in this hobby, and a lot of people love that high adventure game. No matter what the setting, space, fantasy, that's high adventure. If you're in that kind of system, um, I like systems for in that to be reasonably simple and fast paced to avoid anything that could slow down combat, because if you're looking at an adventure game, you're probably looking at a lot of combat, a lot of fighting, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Um so a hit point system of some, whatever you want to call it, you could call it like damage points or whatever, but a hit point system. Thresholds are fine. Sometimes thresholds can even make that even like more interesting.
Yeah.
Savage Worlds has a really interesting sort
Yeah.
of effect
Yeah.
with thresholds,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't really take any damage unless you get like a certain amount of threshold. So
Yeah.
that way, when you do take that damage, the your HP is lower and it hurts more.
Yeah.
You know, it really messes you up. But like little piddly crap is just like cinematically somebody, took a hit. So it feels very much like you're watching an action movie where the guy like gets punched, but it's not that big of a deal. But then the guy gets punched off of a building, and that's a big deal.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I tend to agree with you. I do like it snappy. However, the systems that I like the best is where you can. So, the one thing I've never liked about health points in most games or hit points is usually the system is here is an arbitrary number. When it is reduced to 0, you are dead. But if you're at 1 point, you are completely fine. You got spears and axes and everything else sticking out of you, but you're good. I've never liked that. I like you to feel like you're in a fight. So like when you like I said, I've said this before. I think role playing games should be as simulatory as possible for your brain because you're trying to put yourself in the mind of the character. So you're trying to make the numbers on paper do that to your brain, which is very hard to do because you're not actually getting hit, you're not actually getting stabbed, but you're trying to make a sequence of numbers activate something in your brain that goes, oh man, I'm feeling it, you know? So I like when characters show damage. You look at World of Darkness, every damage level that you take there after the first 3 bruisings, you start to take negatives to your core statistics because you're getting beaten up, you're getting wounded, you're getting hurt. Savage Worlds has a very simple mechanic with it. I think when you take a wound, you take a -2 to just everything. My threshold system has an injury system as well, where like you take a -1 to a random stat, depending on where you got hit. I like that. I want it to be snappy, don't get me wrong, but I also want to feel like Bruce Willis at the end of Die Hard. I don't necessarily want to walk in there shiny. I want to walk in there with bleeding feet and cut hands and bloody knuckles, and like I want to feel like I worked for it. You know what I mean? And like I oftentimes with like D&D and or not even just D&D. I know I'm harping on them, but standard health point based systems, you end up coming in. Going out is the same way you came in. You take a couple of health potions, you're fine. You know, I don't like that. I like to feel the injury on a character. Or I like to have the characters feel injury.
Yeah, I can definitely see the value in that. I mean, like you were saying, like in single mod, for instance, like the threshold system works very much so that if you in one hit take a bad enough hit, you take a potential consequence that lingers and can really like affect your gameplay.
Right.
I remember taking a hit to the knee and it screwing up my speed in that game.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was a big deal for my character because I centered my character around his agility score.
Yeah.
That was his best score. So that was it definitely increases that like Bruce Willis effect, like you definitely start thinking a little bit more like engaged in the moment, like, oh crap, what just happened?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't do that now because I just took that big of a hit?
Right.
Oh no.
Oh, I lost.
Oh no.
Shit. Yeah. I think that like those kind of systems, they get me really excited. Let me ask you this. Not again to derail everything, but death goes hand in hand with hit point systems. How do you feel about character death and severity in games?
90% of the time, like, I think like character death should be a realistic looming situation. The rare occasion is those weird, not weird, I don't want to say weird, but it was like those very unique, like often indie games where it's not really like an adventure game. It's not really, the goal isn't like surviving, it's more of like a role-playing-esque game. But there's still some degree of failure involved in those types of games. So it gets a little bit more complicated when you kind of are looking more at that type of game. But like I think character death is definitely something that has to loom like over any serious situation, whether it's actual death, psychological death, complete failure at whatever task you're trying to attempt. If it doesn't loom there, there's no sense of stakes, there's no sense of suspense, and it kind of just it's sort of over time will deteriorate the value of the game. I think your character being able to be a badass doesn't really mean as much if they're just fighting basically preschool children, like if everything is that easy, like who cares?
Spoken like a horror guy, I think that like, I am not a horror guy, as we have already talked about on this podcast many times, but I definitely share some sensibilities with that genre, especially when it comes to RPGs. I agree. I think one of my big problems too with a lot of RPGs is you don't feel the weight of death. But I'm going to pull the curtain back, okay? I'm going to pull the curtain back on game mastering, on game design, on the whole 9 yards for everybody out there. And unfortunately, this is probably going to hurt the games that I game master for anybody listening to this. So if you don't want to see some of my secrets revealed, fast forward like 2 minutes
All right, bye,
or whatever. It's a magic trick. Death is a magic trick, okay? When I was younger, I made a game called Badass Metal, which was just the most severe, insane, crazy fucking mech game you've ever played. Like, people just died all the time. As I aged, I realized that the best story that came out of that was the guy who kept somehow surviving. And then I was like, I don't really want him to die anymore. So, somewhere along the line, I realized that, like, the real trick is making everybody believe that there is a true, utter, looming threat of death without actually intending to kill anybody. And, like, single mod is a perfect example. Look at single mod at its core. That if you take more than 10 damage in one attack, more than 10 damage, which is very possible, because you're usually adding between 6 and 9 to a D20 roll against somebody else. If they roll a 1, you roll a 20. Holy shit, right?
Yeah.
So if you take more than 10 damage, you could potentially die. The minute you say that to somebody, they go, holy shit, looming threat right there. This is a big deal. But if you really look at single mod, it's not that easy to die. It really isn't. First of all, you're usually rolling relatively even with the other person. And if they get that rare hit on you, it's not usually a full 10 damage, even if they're leveled above you. And if they hit for you for over 10 damage, you get like 2 or 3 death saves after that. They all look severe on paper, but they're not actually that severe. Is it possible to die in a hit? 100%. Most certainly, you can die in a hit. I stand by that. Is the percentage of death on a hit as high as people would think it is? No, it's not. You're not as likely to die in single mod as a lot of people stepping up to the table think they are. And it always makes me smile when I game master that or I watch other people play it, because everybody is always afraid of death. Just the fact that you say to them, 10 points, you dead, but you're not. If you read the rules, you're not. That always makes me happy, because you get the characters in that mindset. You get the characters in that mindset of, I could die at any moment. I could croak any time. I could be dead. And yeah, you could. But the percentage of that is like 1. I mean,
like one thing I'd like to. I mean, okay, so like I'm a player of single mod. I'm even with Ordo, like game mastering a single mod setting.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that, and I'm like a numbers guy. Like I really like breaking down the math and just like looking at statistics of dice. But actually, now that you're talking about it, I 100% can see exactly what you're talking about. The percentage.
The other thing is the injury thing. I added the injury thing in. If you take more than 5 damage in a turn, you take an injury, which is a minus 120 your core stats. If your core stat drops below 0, you take an extra 5 damage to your vitality. That is pretty severe. However, that makes people feel like they are about to die way more than that 10-point thing. The 10-point thing scares them outright, but if you really sit down with somebody and you watch them, don't ask them questions because they'll tell you it's the death thing, but watch them. The thing that is driving their fear is the fact that they are just accruing these injuries and taking those -1s and not being able to do the thing. That's the trick, is making the game feel severe while still being able to tell a story and keep your players, most of the time, alive. You look at World of Darkness. They have their damage scales. It looks very severe on paper. I have played with a game master who is a relatively severe fellow. That being said, he's not that severe. I have been playing with him for 2 years now, and I have watched 2 characters die in a non-Halloween based game. Okay? In an actual, like, straight up, this is our weekly game. Maybe 2 characters. And one of them was mine, and I was actively trying to kill the entire party. So, like, the fact is that that's the trick. And I think every game master wants that, is they want you to feel like you could die, because then they're getting that raw emotion out of you. That core, oh my god, I'm gonna die. I'm in my character, he's gonna die. But they don't actually want you to die because they want to tell the story, man. They want to see where the story goes. Would I allow it to happen if the roll happened? Sure. I don't want you to run into Joe Smo dude and he shoots you and kills you in one shot. I don't want that.
Right.
Would I let that happen if the dice did it? 100%. I learned a long time ago just to trust the dice. They're telling a story that is well above my pay grade.
Right.
That being said, I don't want that to happen. I want to see your story, and if you die, I want it to be in a spectacular way. I want it to wrap up all your storylines. I want it to be huge. I want it to be something you tell your children about. You don't get that if Joe Schmo just murders you on the street. So, like, the trick, I think, for a lot of game masters and for a lot of games is to make the damage feel severe without necessarily making it as severe as people think it is. And now nobody's going to be afraid of my games anymore. I've ruined my entire game master career, but...
Well, let me add... Well, I think that's actually really good advice. Because, like, I was saying, I do think, like, the threat of death should be looming so that people are fearful. And I am a horror guy, so I do like that aspect of, like, suspense. But the way that you line that out is, like, giving that looming threat without, actually derailing the game or having it so serious that, like, Joe Schmo on the curb can just end your game. Mm-hmm. And that's a fine thing to balance. And one thing that you touched on with single mod, and that is a pretty popular sort of aspect that's seen in a lot of different ways, is the threshold thing. Mm-hmm. You take a certain amount of damage and something happens. A certain amount of damage output from a character results in X. Sometimes that's a damage to the character stats, to their abilities or whatever. Other times it's if you take a certain amount of damage, you actually take that damage. But if they don't make that threshold, you don't take any damage. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. It sounds to me like thresholds is a really good way to nurture that anxiety in your characters without necessarily killing them outright, because they're afraid of the real consequence that's about to unfold upon them.
I had a superhero game called Annex that had a light heavy kill system. Okay, so you took a bruising if you took any damage less than light, and it took a ton of bruisings to actually kill you. If you took a light, 3 lights equal 1 heavy. 2 heavies, you're dead. And then kill, if you take that much damage, you die. The minute people see that there is an amount of damage that can be done to them in one attack that will kill them, they immediately become afraid. When you really do the numbers on that, though, the chance of somebody hitting that damage, astronomical, almost impossible. But because it's there, and it's on paper, and somebody is constantly staring eye to eye with what number, with the numbered equation with their life force, like, it just puts them right into it. I think that, like like I said, do you want the threat to be there? Yes, you want the threat to be there. But do you want it to be like, it took me a while to learn that you have to kind of strike a balance with the system. A friend of mine says, I always tell the story that the dice tell. And while I agree with that, the other part of that is you have to be playing a game that's willing to tell the story through the dice. And not every game is.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then, on the other side of it, there are some games that are very into the story, much less into the mechanics. So to again digress, which is what we do best on this show. What do you think of systems that kind of separate out like HP altogether from the game mechanic and shift it? Like, I'm thinking like Fate or maybe Call of Cthulhu, where there is like a damage aspect to it, but it's not an HP sort of thing. Yeah, it's woven into the narrative a lot more.
Yeah.
So, you're taking stress or you're taking insanity, and as these things, increase or accrued, isn't it? Sometimes it is, but it's not always, like you're just taking damage. It's like your actual next move or action may depend on whether or not you took stress. You may be too stressed to accomplish a goal, or you may be so stressed you're forced into a panic attack.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, like sort of narrative first HP?
Here's the thing, okay? This is tricky for me because I'm going to get kind of pompous with it, but I think you need somebody who really takes the playing of characters, not just the game mastering of characters, but the playing of characters as kind of an art form, and treats it as such, because I think with games like that, they are really interesting and really cool. I don't think they're bad. And when I listen, what's the podcast we shouted out? It's the Uncanny Valley. It's Two Monsters Rolling.
Two Monsters. Yeah.
They play Fate. They play it extremely well. Extremely well. And you can tell that every one of them takes every consequence they get like directly to heart, And I think the threat of death for a character was only in there maybe once, maybe twice in the entire run of that. But every one of those players played it like this could be their last choice. And Fate is not usually that severe from what I know of it. So I think you need a certain kind of class of player to be able to play a game like that without getting into it, getting that fear of death from the character sheet, with just getting the fear of death from being a character in that situation. You have to be something else to be able to put yourself just without any context at all. Like So like, I'm having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to say. I would say, like, role-playing games is the formula. They're trying to unlock a formula, a mathematical equation that when somebody sees a set of numbers, they feel a certain way without actually doing or feeling that thing. That's how I've always looked at role-playing games, is that it is the math to unlock human sensation when it comes to experiences, right? So, like if you're putting down on a piece of paper, so you're trying to simulate, I am a knight fighting in a dungeon, right? And what you're trying to do with that statistically is you are trying to basically unlock the formula that if I show this person, this human being, this series of numbers in this specific order, they will feel like a knight who is afraid for their life fighting through a dungeon to save a princess. That's what it is. It's like the human equation, right? Like, that's role-playing games. This is what I love about it. When you get right down to the core of it, it is simply somebody trying to take numbers or a language of numbers to explain to somebody how they should feel. And that's crazy to me. Just the idea that we can even do that as a being that exists in the planet is crazy, right?
That's why it's the best hobby in the world.
It really is. It really is. Especially when it's done right. And
right.
I think that, like, where was I going with this? Where did we start on this? I got a
with like
little
fates and like
right.
um
So if Fate's numbers do that for you, then that's awesome. But for me, I've always kind of felt like that in that equation, there has to be like, you're gonna die. if there isn't somewhere in there in that language, you're gonna die. You're not gonna feel like you're gonna die, and that might hurt the role playing experience a little bit, I guess.
I get that. And like, so like, one of the reasons why I like Fate, and I think it's a really good example of this style, but I think you're right. I think it does take a certain type of player to make it work. Um, and that is that like, if Fate is approached in the right way, it could make failure as scary as death.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
because you're writing a character and a story where something is so important to them. You know, it's like a character who is in
that's
maybe
true.
a drama movie or a drama book. You know, it's not necessarily like let's say there's a in a book you have a character who's trying to get the girl, right? He's not going to die, but if he fails to get the girl, that's going to be an emotional death. You know, Fate is sort of a gamification of that kind of narrative. It can be at least.
Right.
So you know, if you layered it right, maybe your character is not necessarily going to die, but they're going to get really psychologically messed up if they fail whatever it is they're
Yeah.
trying. And it's a tricky thing to do, and it's not, you know,
Well,
with I think today with video games and the way that HP's been presented and a lot of, you know, HP games, people aren't really used to that approach.
well, and you've got me there because while I'm harping on the "you're gonna die" thing, I think that like I did forget about the whole you felt like you've been through the battle. And Fate really does that. It makes you feel like you've earned it. Same with Call of Cthulhu. Like it instills those because of those consequences. Like okay, maybe you're not going to just straight up die in Fate, right? But by the time you get to the end, your character will be on paper completely different than how he started. And
Right.
or she. And I think that in itself is indicative of bringing people into it and making them feel that way because you get that kind of like trudge, you know, the trudge of like actually fighting through something and earning something or dealing with something real that you didn't actually deal with, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is what these games, again, like you said, are all about. It's about immersion into this different, like complete
Yes.
different world.
Right.
Um. Okay, let's examine. There's still. I mean, there's this topic is so huge.
It's huge.
Um,
It really is.
and there's so many really creative ways that people
So many.
have expanded upon it. Um, so how much? I guess, you know, like the big question is genre. I wrote an article on the Wizards Respite about different genres of system styles. This isn't like fantasy or horror, but rather, you know, what the characters are trying to accomplish. I think adventure is like another genre. You know, like it could be fantasy, sci-fi, even horror. Could sort of fall into that adventure system
Hmm.
style.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to HP, do you feel like how much do you think this sort of threshold affects the genre style of the system? You know, the core mechanics style hinges on the HP, the pool, diminishing pool of resource that's the core of the character.
100%. I think when you want to define a genre, you need to look no further than the hit points. And I know a lot of people would say combat, a lot of people would say, you know, the skill sets or whatever. I think it goes no further than hit points. If you want an action game where it's a power fantasy and the character's just killing everybody left and right, you want something where the character can absorb a lot of damage and not die. If you are looking for a horror game where the feel is either constant mental struggle or the possible always drop of death, you want a very severe consequence sort of health point system. I think the health point system dictates a lot of the game. It's one of the reasons that in a lot of ways, I know right now I have a core system, and so I'm gonna immediately sound like a hypocrite, but I've never been a huge fan of the single system sort of thing. Like the Palladium is everything is Palladium system, and then they just like kind of layer over the subject matter that they want to layer over to it. Or like, who else does that? White Wolf.
I mean,
You know,
okay.
I mean, I guess they're all horror games, but you see what I'm saying? Like most of the companies have this like base system, and then they layer stuff over it. I think it's less likely like that nowadays. I think it was way more like that in the 90s and 80s. But
Right.
like
But
the
like, I mean,
single
like it's
system,
still like you see like the big systems like Apocalypse. You know, how many different types of powered by Apocalypse games are there?
yeah,
You know,
right,
and
right.
like I think like some of isn't Avatar on the powered by Apocalypse game, like the cartoon anime.
Yes,
You know,
yeah, one
it's
hundred
powered by
percent.
Apocalypse. But
I
then you
believe
actually
so.
look at like the other Apocalypse, like the
Mm-hmm.
original like games that came out with Apocalypse, and it's like, oh, how is this Avatar? You know, like
Yeah.
that was like a brutal, meat grinder of a game.
Well, and I'm not trying to throw any shade towards those single system games. Like I said, I've enjoyed a lot of Palladium systems.
Sure.
I've enjoyed a lot of Palladium games. That being said, do I think that Ninja Turtles, the role playing game, would benefit with a game more rooted in the source material than a game just with a Palladium system with mutant animals tacked over? I would say yes. I think if every game company stopped and took a second to be like, what would the system be for this thing, they would have a lot more success in simulating that thing. I think the indies understand that a lot more than the big
Yeah.
guys do, because you see a lot of indie producers, hell, Cyrus Wright and a lot of
Yeah,
other indie
dude.
producers. They make whatever system they want, whatever they're feeling, whenever, And I think that in a lot of ways that is the better way to go, because you're trying to find the thing that simulates the thing. And I think hit points comes from that. I think that like for me, I think you can do horror in anything. Okay, horror is an ambiance, it is an atmosphere, and I think if you're a good enough game master, you can produce horror results in any system. However, and vice versa, I think, can you do that with action games and anything else? Yeah, if you're a good enough game master, you can use any system to do anything. The thing is will it be better suited?
Hmm.
Like, would a Mothership game be better suited in a Palladium system? No, it's better suited in a Mothership game. And vice versa. I think that like that hit point thing really defines how well your system is going to take to certain genres.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd say like it's giving me a lot of thoughts here. Like
It
I
is.
this just you bringing this up earlier, you just did today, just got my gears turning, and I think you're right. I think that if you are starting out to design a game, it's a great idea to think, maybe your system genre essentially has a big picture. Is it an adventure? Is it a horror, scary sort of game? Is it, a hyper strategic, or is it way more focused on the interpersonal communication between characters and NPCs? Pick that, and then narrow down to the very first thing to come up with is the core resource, the HP, the stress, whatever you want to call it, but that HP core resource and how it's deducted, how can they save it, and how can they get it back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, you could, like, if you look at it that way, you could even make a game out of being a businessman,
Yeah.
and like just it's
100%.
money going in, money going out, and you're trying to like scramble and do a Wolf of Wall Street RPG.
I would add a whole stress level to that. 100%. Like, I think that, there's a lot of things you can do with health points, and I think that, like I said, I think if you're a capable game master and you've got good players, I think you can make anything out of anything. Like, that's the
Yeah,
beauty of role playing games. Is it's all kind of, as much as we love to say that these books and these words on these books define us, it all comes from us. You know, it comes
Right.
from us and the core concept of playing pretend. Oh, might lose me at any point, guys. Just got a flicker. Definitely saw it on camera. So, but as I was saying, I think that like the core concept. Oh man, that is not good. We've had like 3 or 4 flickers. So if this podcast suddenly ends, you guys know why. They could see the flickers. My camera is literally flickering.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we got a bad storm today. Like it went from like 60 degrees to like 20. So
Oh, wow.
it's not fun.
Crap.
So anyway, what I was saying is it's the core concept of pretend. And if everybody there is willing to subscribe to the fantasy, then they're going to be good. The thing is though is that system going to tell the story better? Is it going to put you in that position better? And I think when you're looking at damage levels and hit points, I think everything springs from that. Like how you want your game to go. I personally, looking at single mod, I don't think it's the best for a horror game at all times. Like, I don't think it's the best for a horror game. I also don't think it's necessarily the best for like a strategic war game. I think it's really good for power fantasy action sequences. I think it's great for that because you get a lot of perks. You feel very strong every fight. You get to do a lot of stuff in it. But I don't necessarily. There's definitely other genres I don't necessarily think it works for. I don't know that it would work really well for a drama game. I think that like, and that's something I've learned recently. Like, as like I've been doing homebrews my entire life, but as far as actually publishing role-playing games that people want to play, I've learned a lot in the last 2 years. And one of the things I've kind of come to is I think that like system-wise, you should do what you need to do to make the system flow to what you want it to be, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think hit points is the basis of that.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. That's the like we were saying, at the end of the day, you know, no matter what the characters are doing, whether or not they're trying to slay the dragon, or work their way through a spy scenario, you know, espionage, this resource is their number one priority. It always is. It doesn't matter if they're trying to get the MacGuffin, whatever it might be, that's secondary to this resource because they can't do that goal. They can't accomplish that goal without this resource. Yeah. So that's got to be the place to start. It's really, really interesting concepts that can be sort of had when you start really tinkering with what that resource is. Also, HP is the go-to. We've talked about stress. We've talked about various other like thresholds and stuff like that. But this resource could be anything.
Yeah.
We were I just made the joke, like it could be Wolf of Wall Street RPG. It could literally be money. It could be speed, if you're like a racing sort of style game. You make a speed racer game, stuff like that.
It's the fulcrum for pressure in a game.
Mm.
Like, that's what it is. Like, it's your fulcrum for pressure. It's how you turn the pressure. It's how you get the pressure on your players to make them feel that weight without actually feeling that weight. You know what I mean? So, like, I feel like it could be anything. Whatever your game is, could be that. You really, like, if you're a designer, think about what you're trying to simulate, put that down on paper in a numbered way as best as humanly possible. I also think don't phone in hit points. I think it is an easy way out to just be like, okay, you roll a number of dice and you get a number of hit points, and when it goes to 0, you're dead. Don't phone it in. It is a intricate part of the system. It is an intricate part of the game, more so than attacks, defenses, your powers, your skills, whatever. And it doesn't feel that way. It's going to feel like just an afterthought but it's not, Now
let me ask you one more thing. Another layer here, because there are lots of different ways of doing this. What about offering multiple different styles of HP of this resource within one game? So you do have like a combat HP, Maybe you have a social HP, where you can take psychological damage or social damage, and your social value goes down when a social setting, for that
Yeah.
kind of thing. How do you
I mean,
feel about that? Do you think
I
it's too
love that.
complicated? Do you think it
I,
works?
I love that. Single mod has three ways to get hurt. Like you have a resource pressure, you have a vitality pressure, you have a threshold pressure, and then if you're playing Ordo, you have a mental pressure. So
Yeah,
like I think that like more damage levels the better. You don't want to put too many in that it's going to bog you down during combat and stuff. But I think anything that makes you more versatile is going to make you better. You know.
yeah, yeah. I think so too. I think just brainstorming here. I think that having two or three is probably
Yeah.
pretty easy to work. Once you get beyond that, there's a lot for a character to keep track of,
Yeah.
which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It does maybe limit your players to slightly more experienced players who are a little bit more versed in RPGs. Because when you're brand new, learning your first game is hard. But
Yeah.
once you've already learned one game, it's a lot easier to start learning other games because you already kind of got a feel for things. So it's like picking up a second language and then a third and a fourth. It's not as hard as picking up that first one.
I really
Um,
like games that have health points or stress points being based off things that you can get powers from. So like it's this constant dichotomy balance. I think like almost all my games when I put powers in, there's always a power in there where it's like you can give health to get this. I think that like those
yeah,
are always fun. Vampire the Masquerade has blood points, which I've always thought is really cool. Like the more you drain from people, the more blood points you get. Blood points allow you to boost your skills, buff your skills, and use your powers. But when you run out of them, you starve. And like I always thought that was like a cool like mechanic, you know?
yeah. You have to constantly replenish it
Yeah.
in order to use your abilities and be a badass. But it drains your life, like
Right.
literally, like you have to
Right.
keep eating to get it back, or you're
Yep.
going to die. That's a solid concept, and it's sort of a strategic thing that's not like super. It's sometimes strategic aspects of RPGs can pull you out of the
Mm-hmm.
scenario, but that kind of strategic aspect pushes you into the scenario
Yeah.
because it makes you feel like your character's real life needs are not being met.
Yep.
Like starvation.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Exactly. You're feeling it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we've gotten a good hit on the HP sort of vibe
I
here,
feel
just
like I talked
generally.
at too much in that episode, so I'm sorry to everybody. I'm sorry to Wiz. I feel like I was rambling too
Now,
much on that one.
this is well. There's not too. I mean, honestly, this is not a too much episode. There's so much to talk about on
Mm-hmm.
HP. To be honest with you, I think it would be fun. And if folks uh, tuning into this show agree, I think we should definitely maybe pick one of these aspects because there's so many and just
Yeah.
do a deep dive in them. Start
Yeah.
picking them apart in different systems and how they work, why they do work, why they don't work, why they have excelled in this situation, why they maybe haven't excelled in this situation.
I do. I
Because there's
do
so much to it.
love. I do love core concept talk when you talk about like just the basic nuts and bolts of RPGs. Those have been some of my favorite topics that we've ever had. Those and like the craft topics when it's like how do you play this or something
Yeah,
like that. I think that's one of my favorite topics. It's just like what is HP and how does it
yeah.
work? How does it affect you? Like I love that topic. I love those topics in RPGs.
Yeah. So do I, and I love doing this. This is one of my favorite aspects of this. Just even like just our friendship, yeah, is being able to talk about this guy. Because like
Yeah.
it's hard to have this conversation. I can't have this conversation with my wife. I mean, I can, but she's gonna fall asleep real quick. Not
My
everybody.
my wife tries, but she will go cross-eyed like halfway through it. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
Like I just watch her, just the eyes glaze over, like and then you try to explain it more, so that it's like no, you're not getting it. Here's the system, and then she's like, It's gonna be cold out tomorrow. Like, I totally understand that.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice to be able to like really dive deep
It
into this
is.
kind of stuff.
It is. It really
Hopefully,
is.
there's some game designers out there that are watching this and are digging it, and will get their brains going on their system. Um, Before we roll out of here tonight, Zach, any last shout outs, any last ideas you want to project out there? Any concepts or anything you want to shout out?
I don't have any concepts or project stuff. I did, check out everything we have to offer. I am going to be doing a show soon on the TTRPG side where I play the Lone Wolf books uh, in an episode by myself. So if you want to watch me read a book to you and try not to die, maybe that'll be something you like. Other than that, you can check out everything we have to offer on Old Man Gaming. It is both a TTRPG and video game website. However, you can check out all the TTRPG stuff we do here on Wizards Respite. I do also want to say I'm doing a show for Wizards Respite called Let's Start With Their Name, which has been a lot of fun. If anybody out there wants to be interviewed, please DM me on whatever thing you see me on, because I'm running out of people to interview about it. Didn't think that was going to happen right away, but running out. So I need some fresh faces, some new bodies on that hill before I start going through everybody a second time.
There's I'm sure we're going to get plenty of people wanting to jump in on this. That's a really fun show. That I just talking to about um, that for a second. It's a bunch of people talking about their favorite character, what got them into it. It's really cool because if you're a role player, like you can definitely relate to that. That one character you've always loved.
You get to talk about your favorite character. I think if you do want to be on it, contact Wiz on X or Blue Sky. You can contact me on X or Blue Sky or Facebook or Discord or anything. Just and we'll work something out to interview you. It's 20 to 40 minutes. You get to talk about your favorite character. So that's it for me.
Yeah, tonight I think we've gone through pretty much everything. I really hope that game designers out here put like a few ideas in your head to play around with. I'd love to hear from game designers out there and their approach to HP and this resource pool system. If they're trying something new, what do they like? Why do they like it? Definitely, let us know. Comment, shoot us, comments on X, Blue Sky, everything else. Love to hear from that. Other than that, wizardsrespite.com, all of this stuff is going to be on there. Please check it out. We have also a bunch of articles for game designers, for players, for DMs, GMs, all of that stuff. And of course, t-shirts. Always got.
Christmas. Buy shirts.
Christmas is coming up. Get your DM shirts.
I still want that Dungeon Master shirt. I haven't gotten around to purchasing it. I still want that one. That's the next one. I just ain't got the money because it's Christmas season. But
it is Christmas season. But yeah, I guess until next time, everybody out there, keep rolling them dice.